Boston General Hospital was never silent at night, but this night felt different. The hallway outside the pediatric cardiac unit carried a tension so sharp it seemed to stop the world. Nurses moved quickly. A cart was rushed past. A monitor alarm echoed from room 12B, the room where Mark, just 8 years old, struggled to breathe through tightening chest pain. Inside, Alison Ball held his hand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Tears slid down her face as she whispered his name again and again, hoping he could hear her through the haze of weakness clouding his small, pale features. Beside her, little Mia sat on a stool with her sketchbook clutched tightly against her chest, trying to be brave but trembling with fear. Dr. Whitney pushed through the door with 2 nurses behind him. "Prepare the cardiac team," he ordered. "We're losing stability. He needs intervention now." Alison's breath broke as she stood to her feet, terrified that she was moments away from losing the son she had fought so hard to keep alive. Mia started to cry quietly, burying her face in her book. The hallway door suddenly swung open. A man stopped at the threshold, breathless, shaken, and staring straight at the boy on the hospital bed as if the ground had vanished under him. Kuzman Panuski, his eyes, the same deep, unmistakable shade as Mark's, widened with a shock so raw it froze the staff around him. His chest tightened, not from running but from recognition he could no longer deny. It was him, his son, the child he never knew existed. Mia lifted her head and looked at the stranger who carried the same features as her brother. Alison saw the way Kuzman stared at both children, and in that instant she realized he had just discovered the truth she kept hidden for 8 long years. Her heart thundered. Mark's heart faltered on the monitor. 2 lives collided at once. Kuzman recognized the twins were his. Alison realized the only man who could save her son was the same man who left her standing alone in a wedding dress 9 years ago. Have you ever carried a truth so heavy you feared it would destroy everyone you loved? Have you ever been abandoned by the one person who promised forever? What would you do if the person who broke you suddenly became the only hope for your child's life? These questions were no longer abstract, they were Alison's reality tonight. Here was a mother who had carried her world alone, a boy whose life depended on answers, a man who thought he was doing the right thing years ago, only to face the consequences now. A family torn apart by fear, lies, and choices made in moments of panic. Yet fate had brought them all into one room again, not for closure, but for survival. Kuzman wasn't just here to face his past. He carried knowledge and resources that could save Mark. But healing a broken heart would take far more than medicine. Tonight was just the beginning, because once the truth starts coming out, lives don't just change. They collide, they rebuild, they fight for a second chance. Welcome to Mr. Brugman's Stories, where powerful stories don't just entertain. They teach life-changing lessons. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this across YouTube. Today, we embark on a new journey, one meant to bring peace, love, and understanding to the world. Thank you for being part of our beautiful family. Your support, your comments, your engagement. They are the reason I continue creating stories that uplift the heart and strengthen the soul. God bless you as you listen to this story. I hope you have a blessed day. The cold Boston night pressed against the windshield as Alison Ball guided her aging sedan down a quiet stretch of Dorchester Avenue. The heater rattled weakly, blowing just enough warmth to keep the twins comfortable as they slept in the back seat. The glow of streetlights slid across their faces, Mia curled against her backpack, and Mark, pale even in sleep, breathing a little too shallow for her comfort. Alison kept checking the rearview mirror. Mark had good days and bad days, and tonight had not been one of the good ones. Earlier, he'd clutched his chest twice, insisting it wasn't pain, just pressure, but Alison knew the signs too well. She'd grown used to listening for every shift in his breathing, every change in his tone, every subtle hint that the heart condition he fought daily was tightening its grip again. Her stomach twisted. Tomorrow she had to lead a staff meeting at her design studio, a studio she'd spent 8 years building from nothing but talent, stubbornness, and prayer. Despite all the work, the numbers were sliding in the wrong direction. Rent was behind. Clients were late paying invoices. Equipment needed repairs she couldn't afford. But none of that mattered tonight, not when Mark's health hovered above everything, like a reminder that life didn't care about business plans or dreams. Not when Mia, cheerful and lively, watched her brother every day with a protectiveness far beyond her age. A soft sound rose from the back seat. "Mom, are we home yet?" Mark murmured. "Almost, sweetheart," Alison whispered, glancing back with a gentle smile. "Just getting some gas, okay?" He nodded weakly and rested his head again. The fuel light blinked on, so she pulled into a small gas station near Field's Corner. The place was quiet except for the hum of the ice machine and the faint buzz of old fluorescent signs. Allison stepped out, rubbing her hands together against the cold, and inserted her last $20 bill into the pump. She shivered. This wasn't the life she imagined 9 years ago. Back then, she believed in a future filled with stability, joy, and partnership. Back when she was engaged. Back when love felt simple and safe. But that future had evaporated on one painful day, and she had walked forward alone ever since. When the tank clicked full, Allison leaned into the car. "Hey," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair off Mia's forehead. "Want to go inside and pick out some pizza slices? Your brother could use something warm." Mia brightened instantly and nudged Mark. "Come on, Mark. Pepperoni tonight." Even tired, Mark gave a small smile. "Okay, but only if you carry the box. My hands feel heavy." "I've got it," she said proudly, hopping out of the car. Inside, the gas station held the quiet warmth of late-night service. A familiar clerk, a gentle older woman from Allison's church, looked up from sorting receipts. Her eyes softened the moment she saw Allison's face. "You look worn out, dear," she said softly. "Long day?" Allison nodded, not trusting her voice. The woman quietly slid a free cup of hot coffee toward her. "For the road," she murmured. The kindness hit Allison harder than she expected. She whispered, "Thank you," as Mia and Mark chose slices from the small display counter and placed them on the tray. As they headed toward the register, Allison felt the tiniest flicker of peace. Moments like this, small human gestures, kept her heart steady, kept her moving, kept her fighting. But the night wasn't finished with her yet. As she stepped outside holding the pizza box, a gust of wind swept across the parking lot. She hurried toward the car, focusing on sliding the slices into the back seat before they got too cold. Mia hopped in first, giggling as she held the napkins. Mark followed with slower steps, easing himself into the seat. "Careful, baby," Allison said gently. She shut the door, turned, and froze. A figure stood just beyond the glow of the overhead light. Tall, familiar, watching her with a stillness that sent a wave of heat rushing through her chest. Her breath caught. "Allison?" the man said quietly. "Alison Ball?" Her heart sank as recognition struck. The voice was unmistakable. The face, older, sharper, more composed, was one she once planned to see every morning for the rest of her life. Kusman Panuski, the man who left her waiting in a wedding dress 9 years ago. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. The hum of the gas station faded. The headlights from a passing car brushed across his features, the same deep-set eyes, the same steady jaw, the same expression she tried for years to forget. "Kusman," she whispered, gripping the car door so hard her hand trembled. He stepped closer, stopping just short of her. His breath formed clouds in the cold air. I didn't expect, Allison, Now is not the time," she cut in, her voice barely steady. "Please, I need to get these kids home." Before he could answer, Mia peeked through the window and waved at him, innocent, unaware, warm. Kusman's eyes followed the movement, and he saw Mark's face illuminated under the car's interior light. That moment stopped him cold. The shape of the boy's eyes, the tilt of his head, the quiet seriousness he carried even in stillness, a reflection of himself. His throat tightened, his chest clenched, and whatever words he planned to speak vanished. Allison saw the realization on his face, and her pulse quickened. "Don't," she whispered harshly, "not tonight." He swallowed hard. "Allison, please." She slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, unwilling to let the past breathe for even one more second. As she drove away, she didn't look back, but Kusman didn't move. He stood rooted in the cold Boston night, watching the taillights disappear, knowing something inside him had shifted forever. The cold seeped through the windshield of the rental car as Kusman Panuski sat motionless behind the steering wheel. He hadn't turned on the heat. He barely breathed. The engine idled softly beneath him, but inside the cabin, it felt like the world had stopped. He had just seen Alison Ball. After 9 long years of absence, 9 years of silence he never deserved to give her, she was suddenly there again in front of him. Older, tired, and carrying the weight of 2 children who should have had him in their lives from the beginning. His pulse hammered against his ribs. The glow from the gas station sign flickered across the windshield, painting his expression in uneven patterns. He stared through the glass, replaying every second of the encounter, every look, every tremor in Alison's voice. He had imagined seeing her again millions of times. He never imagined seeing them. The twins, his children. He pressed his palms into the steering wheel, forcing himself to breathe. The boy, Mark, had eyes identical to his, a seriousness far beyond his age, a quiet strength that mirrored the child Kuzman once was before everything in his life collapsed. And the girl Mia, with her bright energy and stubborn little smile, she carried Alison's warmth, her spark, her compassion. He had missed everything, their first steps, their first words, their birthdays, their lives, all because 9 years earlier, he made a choice that shattered more than a wedding. He closed his eyes, and the memories pulled him back. He could still recall the cold room in their old home in Newton where his mother had spent her last days. A frail woman with gentle eyes and a soft voice that never raised above calmness, even when pain gripped her chest. She always smiled at him, always whispered encouragement, never let her condition, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, take away her tenderness. But watching her decline carved fear into his heart at a young age. He remembered standing beside her bed as a teenager, her hand weak in his. "Live a full life, my boy," she said with a breath too thin. "Don't let fear decide your future." He tried to believe her. But then, she died. Her heart simply gave out, quiet, quick, irreversible. And the funeral that followed became the day his father began reshaping his destiny. His father, a hard man with sharp expectations, sat beside him after the burial, gripping his shoulder tightly. "This condition runs through our blood," he said without emotion. "Your mother's suffering ends with her. I won't have you repeat her mistakes. You will not marry young. You will not have children. We will not pass this curse forward." Those words were not advice. They were law. For years, they dictated every choice Kuzman made, where he worked, who he dated, what he avoided. But everything changed when he met Alison. She was the only person who ever broke through the shell his father built around him. She was joy, ambition, softness, strength. She was the life he always wanted, but never believed he deserved. He proposed to her because she made him feel fearless. But the night before the wedding, everything fell apart. His father arrived unannounced, stepping into his apartment with a single folder in his hand. "This is your genetic test," he said, tossing it onto the table. "You carry the same mutation. If you marry her, you destroy her future. If she's pregnant, the child will suffer like your mother did." Kuzman tried to argue, but fear strangled him. He kept seeing his mother's fading breath, the way her chest struggled, the way her life ended too early. His father delivered the final blow: "If you go through with this wedding, you'll spend your life watching your wife and child die slowly. I won't support you. I won't stand by you. And you will destroy everything." He should have stood up to him. He should have trusted Alison. He should have spoken the truth. Instead, panic drowned him. He vanished from the wedding before the ceremony began. A coward's exit. A wound Alison never deserved, and one he carried like a chain every day since. A sharp breath tore through his chest as he leaned back against the headrest. "God, what have I done?" he whispered. Years passed, and in trying to escape his father's shadow, he built a new life, aggressively, relentlessly. He worked in finance, then shifted into tech investments. Long nights, endless contracts, calculated risks, meeting after meeting. He made money. He gained influence. He built companies, but none of it filled the gap Alison left, nor did it silence the guilt. He knew she was out there somewhere, raising a child she believed would have been safer without him, because that was the lie he allowed his father to plant in his mind. But seeing her tonight, exhausted yet hopeful for her children, seeing the boy who looked exactly like him, and seeing the girl who carried Alison's smile, it destroyed him. His heart pressed harder than he expected, not from physical pain, but from dread. He recognized something familiar in the boy's breathing earlier. The shallow rise and fall, the hesitation between breaths. Signs he knew too well, because he had once lived them. That was when the truth hit him like a strike to the chest. Mark wasn't just his son. He likely inherited the same condition that once nearly took his life. His stomach twisted. His pulse raced. His hands shook against the steering wheel. "No," he muttered. Not that. Not him. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't just watch Alison drive away with a child struggling to breathe and not do something. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone and began searching. First for Alison's studio, then for their old mutual contacts. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through years of numbers and addresses. He found the studio listing, closed temporarily. That only sharpened his panic. He contacted a mutual friend still living in the area and asked for help. After a long, hesitant pause, the woman finally whispered, "Alison's at Boston General. Mark's in serious condition." Everything inside him broke at once. He threw the car into gear, tires skidding slightly as he pulled out of the gas station. His breath came out in rapid bursts. Traffic lights blurred. Street signs faded into streaks. He drove with the urgency of a man chasing the last chance to redeem everything he once destroyed. "Hold on, Alison," he said under his breath. "Hold on, Mark." He pressed harder on the accelerator. Tonight, fate wasn't giving him a choice. It was summoning him. And this time, he couldn't run. The drive from Dorchester to Cambridge felt endless to Kuzminiewski, even though the roads were nearly empty. His hands tightened around the steering wheel whenever he imagined Mark's shallow breathing. Every red light felt like a punishment. Every slow turn felt like a reminder of the years he'd wasted letting fear command his life. The glowing facade of Boston General Hospital finally appeared ahead, tall and steady against the night sky. He pulled into the emergency parking area, barely remembering to slam the car door shut before rushing toward the entrance. The cold Boston air bit at his face, but he didn't slow down. His heart pounded with memories, regret, and a kind of determination he hadn't felt since the night he almost became a husband. Inside, the hospital lobby buzzed with muted activity. Nurses checking charts, security guards assisting visitors, a few exhausted parents slumped in plastic chairs. But none of it mattered. He hurried toward the pediatric cardiac wing with only one name repeating in his mind. Mark. Mark. My son. Those words struck him with even greater force the closer he got to the hallway leading to the unit. He moved past the reception desk quickly, following the small signs pointing toward the side corridor. His footsteps echoed softly as he pushed through the double doors of the pediatric cardiac ward. He stopped at room 12B. The door was slightly open. A faint beeping rolled into the hallway, steady but fragile. He stepped forward carefully. Inside, Alison sat at the side of the bed, her posture curved over Mark's small hand as if shielding him from anything that might harm him. Mia leaned gently against her mother's shoulder, clutching the drawing she'd worked on earlier, a picture of the three of them holding hands under a bright sun. The sight made something cave inside him. Mark's skin looked pale in the low hospital light, and each breath seemed to take effort. And Fourline ran from his small arm into a machine that hummed softly by the bedside. His lashes fluttered as if he was drifting between sleep and discomfort. Alison turned first, her eyes glossy from tears and exhaustion. For a moment she didn't react, as if her mind refused to process the figure standing frozen at the doorway. But then recognition hit her. Her expression tightened sharply. "Kusman?" Her voice cracked into something raw and furious. "What are you doing here?" He stepped in slowly, keeping his distance, his voice trembling. I heard about Mark. I had to come." "You had to come," she repeated sharply. "Now, after 9 years?" She stood from her chair quickly, positioning herself between him and the bed. "You don't get to appear out of nowhere and act like you belong here." "I don't expect you to forgive me," he whispered. "I know exactly what I did to you. I know the pain I caused. You don't know even half of it," she snapped, eyes burning. "You left me standing alone in front of everyone I loved. You disappeared like I was nothing. You walked away knowing." She stopped, her voice shaking uncontrollably. He breathed deeply. "I didn't know you were pregnant. If I had known, that wouldn't have changed the fact you ran," Alison cut in. "You ran because it was easier than facing your own fear." He lowered his head. She continued, her voice trembling with years of held-back anguish. "Do you know what it's like to carry twins alone? To work day and night just to keep food on the table? To watch your child struggle to breathe and pray he sees another morning?" He swallowed hard. "I know I failed you. I know I failed them too. But Alison, when I saw them tonight at the gas station," her chest rose sharply, bracing, "I recognized the truth immediately. I know those eyes. I know that look. I knew it before you even said a word. They're mine. I see it. I feel it. The words broke something inside her. She turned away, gripping the rail of the hospital bed. A small voice rose from behind her. "Mom, do I know him?" Mark whispered, lifting his head slightly. Alison closed her eyes. "You're okay, sweetheart. Try to rest." Mia looked past her mother, studying Kuzman's face with a quiet curiosity. "Why does he look like Mark?" she asked softly. The question cut the air cleanly. Kuzman exhaled slowly. "Because—" His voice faltered, then steadied. "Because I'm their father." Alison whipped around, eyes blazing, but she didn't speak. Emotion tangled with exhaustion, grief, and confusion. He took a step closer, cautiously. "Alison, I need to explain why I left. It wasn't because I didn't love you. It wasn't because I didn't want a future with you. I left because I let fear control my decisions. My mother died from this same condition. My father convinced me I would pass it on. He told me marrying you would destroy your life, that having children would doom them to the same fate." His voice shook. "He terrified me, and I listened. I shouldn't have, but I did." She stared at him with disbelief and pain mixed together. "So you left me to carry the consequences alone? You abandoned us to protect us?" "I see now how twisted that sounds," he admitted. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but all I did was break everything. But Alison, I survived the condition. I received a treatment called the Townsend Protocol. I've funded advancements for years. I know this illness. I know how to help. And when I saw Mark struggling to breathe tonight," his voice cracked, "I knew exactly what was happening." For the first time, Alison's fury softened. "Not fully, but slightly. You went through the same thing?" He nodded. "Yes. And I can help him. I want to help him. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Let me—" She looked down at Mark, whose breathing had grown unsteady again. Her hand trembled as she brushed hair from his forehead. The door opened quietly as Dr. Whitney stepped into the room, glancing between the distressed adults and the trembling monitors. "Everything all right in here?" he asked gently. Alison straightened. "Dr. Whitney, this is—" "Kuzman," he said, extending a shaky hand. "I have the same heart condition Mark has. I received the Townsend Protocol years ago. I fund the research. I know the treatment. Mark fits the indicators." Dr. Whitney paused, studying him with a professional sharpness. "You're familiar with this?" "I lived through it," Kuzman replied. "And I want to do whatever is necessary to help him." A flicker of hope crossed Dr. Whitney's expression. "If that's true, then Mark might qualify for our experimental therapy trial. We begin assessments at sunrise. It could be exactly what he needs." Alison pressed a hand to her mouth, trembling. Kuzman looked at her, not demanding, not pleading, but quietly present. "For his sake," he said softly, "let me stay, let me help. Please." The room held its breath. Alison looked at her son. She looked at Mia. She looked at the man who once crushed her life, standing here now, trying to repair what he broke. Finally, her shoulders lowered. "Just slightly, for Mark," she whispered. "You can help." The quiet in room 12B settled like a thin blanket, fragile and easily disturbed. Machines beeped in steady intervals, a rhythm that echoed the uncertainty hanging over the room. Alison Ball stood near the foot of the bed, arms folded tight across her chest, her eyes fixed on the sleeping form of Mark. Mia had curled up on the small couch, her sketchbook resting against her chest as she drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. Across the room, Kuzman kept a respectful distance, unsure if he had permission to breathe, let alone speak. The fluorescent light above them hummed faintly, reflecting the exhaustion etched into Alison's expression. For a moment, he simply watched her, the way her shoulders rose and fell with each breath, the way her fingers trembled near the bed rail, the way she seemed torn between collapsing and screaming. He had done this to her. Years ago, he made a choice that fractured her life, and now he stood here trying to repair something that never should have been broken. Finally, Alison turned toward him, her eyes red but steady. "You said you wanted to explain," she whispered. "So explain." Her voice cut cleanly through the silence. He stepped forward slowly, pulling a chair from the corner so he could sit without crowding her. His movements were careful, aware that any misstep could force her to shut down again. He sat beside the bed, not too close, but close enough that she could see every truth written across his face. "When I left 9 years ago," he began softly, "I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I was scared, terrified actually, of something I didn't understand, something I let control every decision. She didn't respond, but her jaw tightened. He took a breath. My mother had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the same condition Mark has. I watched her struggle through episodes that made her collapse. I watched her fight for breath. And then, I watched her lose that fight. Alison swallowed hard, but didn't interrupt. When she died, he continued, I was young, and my father was the only voice I knew how to listen to. He told me that marrying young would be reckless, that having children would be irresponsible. He said I would pass on the same condition. He made it sound like I'd be sentencing my own family to early graves. He rubbed the back of his neck, ashamed. I believed him, completely. So when he found out you were pregnant before the wedding, he confronted me. He made it sound like I would destroy you, destroy our child. He said walking away was the responsible thing. He twisted everything until I believed disappearing would save you. Alison stared at him, her lips parting in disbelief. You thought leaving me at the altar was protecting me? She whispered. Yes, he said quietly. And I know now how devastatingly wrong that was. I should have talked to you. I should have trusted you. I should have been man enough to face my fear. Instead, I made the worst choice of my life. Alison's eyes watered again, but her anger was no longer sharp. It was heavy, weighed down with years of unanswered questions. And the protocol? She asked. You said something earlier. He nodded. After I left, something changed inside me. I started researching everything I could about the condition. I wanted to understand what my mother went through, what my own risks were. That's when I learned about early-stage clinical studies on something called the Townsend Protocol, a treatment aimed at stabilizing heart muscle growth and improving long-term cardiac function. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so it wouldn't disturb the children. I qualified for the trial. I went through months of testing, adjustments, and monitoring. It wasn't easy, but it worked. My heart stabilized. My risks dropped. My life expectancy returned to normal. Alison blinked, stunned. You mean, you've been healthy all these years? Yes, he answered. Healthy enough to work, to travel, to build a foundation that funds research for this very treatment. Healthy enough to be a husband and a father. His voice broke. But you had to raise our twins alone, because I ran from a fear that never even had to control me. A long silence followed. Alison let out a shaky breath and moved toward the chair beside him. She didn't sit immediately. She hesitated, as if unsure whether sitting next to him meant forgiveness. Then, slowly, she lowered herself onto the seat. They sat side by side, separated only by years of pain and a sleeping child who needed both of them more than ever. She didn't look at him at first. She stared at the monitor, at the slow pattern of Mark's heartbeat. When I found out I was pregnant, she said quietly, I hoped you'd come back. I hoped you'd walk through the door and say you made a mistake. But days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And eventually, I stopped waiting. He bowed his head. I'm sorry. For everything. Alison wiped her cheek gently with the back of her hand. Mark deserves the truth. Mia deserves the truth. And before tonight, I thought you didn't care enough to even look for us. I never stopped caring, he said. Not once. I just didn't know how to come back from what I did. She finally met his gaze, tired but honest. They're your children, Kusman. The words left her lips with a mix of sorrow and acceptance, not forgiveness. Not yet, but acknowledgement. He inhaled slowly, as if the room had finally given him permission to breathe. I won't run again, he said. Not from you, not from them, not from anything. Alison turned her attention back to Mark, brushing her fingers across his forehead. I don't know what this means for us, she whispered. But for their sake, we start here. And in that fragile moment, quiet, painful, truthful, something shifted between them. Not healing, not reconciliation, but the first step toward both. The hallway outside room 12B had quieted by the time Dr. Whitney stepped out to continue reviewing Mark's charts. The night had stretched deep into the early hours, leaving the hospital coated in a heavy stillness. Alison Ball exhaled slowly, rubbing her forehead as she watched Mark sleep. Her exhaustion clung to her shoulders, but her eyes held a new glimmer, the smallest hint of possibility. Beside her, Kuzmaniewski remained seated, his posture steady but tense, as if waiting for Alison to push him away again. After everything he admitted, after placing his past in front of her like a wound reopened, he wasn't sure she'd even want him in the same room. Alison's voice broke the silence first. Let's Take a moment. Her tone was soft, not forgiving but no longer filled with fire. She glanced toward the small couch where Mia slept peacefully. Come with me, she whispered, nodding gently toward the hallway. We'll grab something for a few minutes. I don't want to leave the kids long, but I need some air. He nodded, grateful for even that small invitation. They stepped quietly into the corridor, the soft pulse of monitors trailing behind them. The elevator doors opened with a muted chime, and they rode down to the cafeteria in silence. The early morning hush made the hospital feel like a world suspended between fear and hope. Inside the cafeteria, the harshness of fluorescent lights softened against empty tables. The smell of reheated coffee and late-night sandwiches lingered in the air. Alison grabbed 2 cups of warm water and a packet of tea, while Kuzman picked up a sandwich, strikingly unsure of whether he should offer it to her or keep it. He placed it on the table between them, wordlessly leaving the choice up to her. Alison sat across from him, elbows resting on the table, hands wrapped around the warm cup. Her eyes drifted toward the door, as if listening for any sound from the pediatric floor above. Kuzman broke the silence first. Thank you for letting me stay. She didn't look at him immediately. Her gaze stayed fixed on the tea bag floating slowly to the bottom of her cup. I didn't do it for you, she said softly. I did it for Mark. He nodded, accepting it fully. I know. And that's enough. For the first time, she lifted her eyes toward him. There wasn't anger in them anymore. Just years of exhaustion mixed with something quieter, something complicated. Before she could reply, the cafeteria door opened softly and little footsteps padded inside. Mom? It was Mia, holding her sketchbook to her chest, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She had woken and followed their familiar voices. Mia, Alison said gently, standing to scoop her into her arms. You should be resting. I couldn't sleep, Mia murmured, leaning against her mother's shoulder. She looked at Kuzman with the simplicity only a child could possess. Can Daddy sit with us? The question struck both adults at the same time. Alison froze, breath catching for a second. Kuzman's heart clenched sharply in his chest. He swallowed. Only if your mom says it's okay. Mia turned her big brown eyes toward Alison, waiting. Alison hesitated, searching her daughter's face, then nodded slowly. Sit, she said quietly. We're all here anyway. Mia smiled in triumph and climbed onto the bench between them. She placed her sketchbook on the table and opened it. Look, she said proudly. I drew us. She pointed to each figure carefully, herself in a bright dress, Mark with a small toy car in his hand, Alison with her hair tied up, and beside them, a man drawn with broad shoulders and kind eyes. That's you, she told Kuzman. His throat tightened as he traced the drawing with his eyes. You drew me. You look like Mark, she said simply. So I thought maybe you belong with us too. The innocence of her words felt like a quiet blow to the chest. Alison looked down, blinking away moisture from her eyes. It wasn't the time or place to unravel emotions, but Mia's drawing had touched something deep in both of them. Alison gently smoothed her daughter's hair. We're just taking things one step at a time, okay? Mia nodded. But he's still Daddy, right? Alison inhaled slowly. He is your father, she said carefully. That part is true. Hearing it spoken aloud shifted something in the air. For 9 years that truth had lived silently between reality and possibility. Now it had shape. Now it had breath. Kuzman leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the table. May I see the rest of your drawings? Mia brightened and turned the page. This one is Mark playing with his cars, she explained. Kuzman smiled softly. I loved those when I was his age. I used to take them apart and try putting them back together. Mia's eyes widened. Mark does that too. He opens things and fixes them. The connection rippled through the table. Simple, natural, undeniable. Alison watched quietly, her heart tugged by the sight. This moment, this small interaction, showed her something painful and beautiful at the same time. The ease with which her children connected to him, the traits they had inherited without ever knowing the man behind them, the life they could have had if fear hadn't stolen the chance. After a few minutes, Mia rested her head against Alison's shoulder again, drifting back into sleep. Alison stroked her hair softly. Kuzman watched the gentle scene, his expression full of longing and remorse. I missed so much, he whispered. More than I can ever fix. Alison didn't respond at first. She stared at the sleeping child in her arms and then at the sandwich untouched in front of her. You did, she said finally. Her voice wasn't sharp, just honest. "But you're here now, and Mark needs you." "They both do." A quiet hope flickered in his expression. "I want to be part of their lives, not just today, not just because of the hospital. I want to be here for everything. If you'll let me." Alison studied him carefully. She remembered the humiliation of standing in front of a silent chapel. She remembered the shock, the endless questions, the ache of raising 2 babies on her own with no answers. But she also remembered love, a real love that once held the promise of a home, a family, of forever. Now, sitting across from him in a hospital cafeteria, she saw a man stripped of excuses, a man who had been broken by his own choices and now stood in front of the consequences with open hands instead of running, a man she once loved deeply. She sighed softly. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said honestly. "But tonight, this is a start." Kuzma nodded slowly, grateful for even that small opening. "I'll learn whatever comes next," he replied. "I won't expect it, I won't demand it, but I'll earn it." They sat together in quiet understanding as the clock ticked toward dawn. A fragile tenderness threaded itself between the fear and the exhaustion, not strong enough to call healing, but strong enough to hold on to hope. And for the first time in years, Alison didn't feel entirely alone. The sky above Boston had begun to lighten by the time Alison Ball and Kuzma returned to her house with the twins. The streets were quiet, washed in the pale gray that settles over a city before sunrise. The hospital had allowed a short break while the early morning assessments for Mark were prepared, and Alison desperately needed a moment to breathe after a night spent holding her children together. Her small home in Dorchester felt different the moment they stepped inside. Not calmer, but fuller, as if the night's events had stretched the walls and opened doors she never expected to open again. Mia was the first to run in, dropping her sketchbook on the couch before curling under her favorite blanket. Mark walked slower, still pale but more comfortable without the machines around him. Alison helped him ease into the corner of the sofa and adjusted a pillow behind him. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Mark nodded, just tired. Kuzman hovered near the doorway, unsure if he should sit or stand, unsure if he belonged in a space that had always been Alison's alone. But when Mark looked at him, really looked, it made something inside him settle. "You can come in," Mark whispered. It was small, fragile permission. It meant everything. Alison noticed how the moment softened the air between them. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and stepped into the kitchen to make coffee. She expected Kuzman to remain in the living room, but after a moment, she heard footsteps behind her. "Can I help with anything?" he asked carefully. "You don't have to," she replied, though her tone didn't push him away. "I know," he said gently, "but I'd like to." Something in his voice made her pause. She nodded toward the cabinet. "Mugs are in there." He moved quietly, almost cautiously, as though afraid that making too much noise would disturb the fragile peace hovering in the home. Alison watched him for a moment, noticing small details she had forgotten, the way he organized things without being asked, how he remembered to rinse a mug before filling it, how he moved with a familiar patience that once made her feel safe. When the coffee finished brewing, he poured 2 cups and set them on the small kitchen table. Alison sat first, brushing her hair away from her tired eyes. He sat across from her, posture steady, expression searching. The early sunlight crept through the blinds, painting soft lines across the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was Alison who broke the silence. "You know," she began quietly, "my grandmother used to tell me something when I was little. She said that if 2 people were meant for each other, life would always find a way to bring them back together, even if it took years, even if everything fell apart." Kuzman listened intently, his fingers curled around his cup, the warmth grounding his hands. She said life has a strange way of choosing moments we never expect, moments that force us to face what we ran from. He swallowed. "Do you believe that?" "I didn't," she admitted. "Not for a long time. After you left, I promised myself I'd never look back. I buried every memory, every hope, every possibility. I built a life for the twins without imagining you in it." She paused, staring into her coffee. "But when I saw you at the gas station, it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like the world was pushing us into a moment I'd avoided for years." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of acknowledging something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for a long time. Kuzman leaned forward, his voice low. "I think your grandmother was right." She lifted her gaze, surprised. "I've been running from my past since the day my mother died," he continued. "Running from fear. from responsibility, from the truth. But last night, seeing Mark struggle, seeing you carry everything alone, it hit me harder than anything ever has. His voice tightened. I don't want to run anymore. Not from you, not from them, not from the life I should have had the courage to embrace. Alison's breath caught. Those words, honest, unguarded, were ones she never thought she would hear from him. Koosman, she whispered, unable to finish the sentence. He reached across the table but stopped halfway, leaving the choice to her. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said softly. I'm asking for a chance to be here, a real chance, to show you that I can be the man I should have been. She stared at his hand for a long moment before placing her own gently in his. The touch was hesitant, uncertain, but genuine. The room fell silent again, this time full of something warm. Not romance, not resolution, but a step toward something that might one day become both. In the living room, the twins murmured softly in their sleep. The sun rose another inch, brushing the kitchen floor with a faint golden glow. It's strange, Alison said quietly, eyes drifting toward the window. Last night I felt like my world was falling apart, but right now, it feels like it's coming together in a way I never expected. Maybe this is our second chance, he said. She looked at him, a small smile shaping her lips. Maybe. A moment of peaceful stillness settled between them, a peace they hadn't known in nearly a decade. Then Alison inhaled and stood. We should get back to the hospital soon. They'll be starting Mark's assessments. Of course, he said, rising with her. She walked into the living room and gently touched Mark's shoulder. Sweetheart, we have to go back now. He groaned softly but nodded. Mia rubbed her eyes and stretched her arms sleepily. As the family gathered near the door, Alison glanced back at Koosman. This time, there was no anger in her eyes, just something soft, cautious, and open. I'm glad you're here, she said quietly. He nodded, his expression filled with a quiet promise. I'm not going anywhere. And as they stepped outside into the fresh Boston morning, the sunlight washed over them, warm, steady, symbolic. Not a perfect beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. A new dawn for all four of them. The early morning sun had barely risen when Alison Ball, Koosman Pinoski, and the twins stepped back into Boston General Hospital. Though dawn rested gently over the city, the tension inside Alison's chest had only grown heavier. Every step down the long corridor toward the pediatric cardiac unit sounded louder than it should, echoing the worry tightening inside her. Mark held her hand weakly, his small fingers warm but fragile. Mia, full of quiet morning energy, walked beside them clutching her sketchbook like a lucky charm. Behind them, Koosman carried the hospital bag Alison had packed quickly before leaving her house again. Room 12B looked the same as they left it. Lights dimmed, machines steady, bed prepared for a long morning of evaluations. Nurses greeted them with practiced warmth, but Alison could feel the urgency hidden beneath their calm faces. A nurse knelt to Mark's eye level. Ready for a busy morning, buddy? She asked gently. Mark nodded, brave but tired. Alison helped him onto the bed as nurses adjusted wires and prepared the ultrasound machine. She stood close to him, smoothing his hair back, whispering small reassurances that steadied her as much as they steadied him. Meanwhile, Koosman spoke quietly with the administrative staff just outside the door. Forms needed signatures. Billing needed authorization codes. The clinical trial paperwork required immediate approval. He handled each part swiftly and confidently. No hesitation, no confusion, no sign of the man who once ran from responsibility. He walked back into the room with a clipboard and set it gently on a counter. Everything's covered, he told Alison. The foundation will handle the trial costs. Mark won't have to wait for anything. She looked at him, genuinely looked, and something softened in her eyes again. Thank you, she murmured. He nodded once, not expecting praise, simply relieved to finally be useful. The evaluations began. A technician performed an echocardiogram, gliding a probe over Mark's chest. The monitor displayed the rhythmic motion of his heart, each contraction, each strain, each irregular movement. Alison couldn't interpret the images, but she watched them anyway, hoping somehow she could absorb their meaning. Each time Mark winced slightly from the cold gel, she squeezed his hand. Mia sat on the couch with her sketchbook open. She drew quietly, lines forming shapes of hearts, clouds, and tiny figures holding hands. Once in a while, she peeked toward Koosman, who smiled softly at her, careful not to intrude on the moment. Dr. Whitney entered the room mid-assessment, flipping through the developing results on a tablet. "Mark is showing the markers we anticipated," he said calmly. "His heart muscle is thicker than it should be, and the rhythm is irregular at times. The Townsend protocol may give him the stability he needs." Allison's pulse quickened. "Is he a candidate?" Dr. Whitney nodded. "Early signs point to yes. We'll know more once the lab results return, but he has the characteristics we expect in a strong responder." Relief washed over her in a slow, trembling breath. Koosman stepped closer to the foot of the bed, his voice steady but gentle. "The trial helped me when I was younger than most candidates. It kept my symptoms from progressing. Mark has a good chance, Allison." She turned to him. "Hearing you say that, it helps more than you know." He didn't say anything. He just let the weight of her words settle. As the evaluations continued, oxygen tests, light stress monitoring, blood pressure readings, the emotional toll pressed harder on Allison. She tried to remain calm, but seeing Mark connected to multiple machines brought back every late-night fear she had ever carried alone. At one point, she stepped aside, covering her eyes with her hands. She didn't cry, but her breathing hitched. Mia noticed and walked over, tugging her mother's sleeve. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered. "He's strong, like you." Allison knelt and hugged her daughter tightly. Across the room, Koosman watched, a storm of guilt and gratitude raging quietly inside him. He had missed years of these moments, years of worry, years of late nights, years of being the steady presence Allison needed. But today, he was here, and he wasn't leaving. When the evaluations paused for a short break, Mark rested against his pillow, worn out but stable. Allison sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing the blanket around him. "You're doing great," she whispered. Mark managed a small smile. "Will it help me play outside again, without getting tired?" Allison swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. Before she could respond, Koosman approached slowly. "I used to get tired too," he said gently. "When I was young, I couldn't run far, couldn't play as long as my friends, but after I had the treatment, I got stronger. I could do things I never thought I could. You can get there too, Mark." Mark looked at him thoughtfully, then asked the first vulnerable question he had ever directed at the man standing before him. "Did it hurt?" Koosman shook his head softly. "Not much. The tests are the hardest part. The treatment feels like a normal procedure. And afterward, I felt better every week." Mark nodded, reassured. Allison watched the exchange, the calm patience in Koosman's voice, the gentleness in his posture, the sincerity threading through each word. He wasn't performing. He wasn't pretending. He was stepping into fatherhood naturally, instinctively. A nurse returned to update them on the next set of tests. "We'll be starting blood work soon. Should take only a few minutes." Mia looked up from her sketchbook. "Can Daddy stay with us the whole day?" The question hung in the room, tender and unfiltered. Allison's heart skipped a beat. Koosman froze, emotion tightening his throat. She placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. "He's staying," Allison said softly. "He's not going anywhere." Koosman blinked, a mixture of gratitude and aching remorse filling his expression. "Thank you," he whispered. The morning wore on, filled with tests, updates, and brief moments of stillness. Through it all, the dynamic in the room shifted subtly. No longer fractured, no longer distant. Something new was forming, fragile, hopeful, stitched together by honesty and necessity. A family beginning to rebuild. The early afternoon light slipped softly through the narrow windows of the family waiting room. The nurses had taken Mark for a brief imaging scan, and Mia sat in the corner drawing quietly, humming to herself. For the first time since the hospital visit began, the room wasn't filled with frantic movement or machines. It was still not peaceful, but suspended. Alison Ball stood near the window, arms wrapped around her chest, staring at the faint lines of sunlight touching the floor. Her thoughts tugged in several directions at once, looping between the past, the present, and the future she couldn't quite see. Behind her, Koosman Newski stood with his hands in his pockets, unsure of how close to stand or how much space to give her. The distance between them wasn't far, but the memories sitting between them were heavy. Finally, Allison turned around. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Koosman nodded once. "I know." She gestured toward the hallway. "Let's step out for a minute." They walked out of the waiting room and found an empty alcove near a vending machine, a small, ignored corner of the hospital where conversations went unheard. Allison leaned against the wall, taking a slow breath as if bracing herself. Koosman remained a few steps away, not wanting to crowd her. "Last night, When you told me why you left, she began, her voice steady but subdued. I heard what you said. I listened, but I haven't actually told you what that day did to me. He lowered his gaze. I want to hear it, even if it hurts. It will, she replied softly. Because it hurt me. She pushed her hair back, eyes drifting briefly toward the floor as old memories rose to the surface. The morning of our wedding, I woke up feeling like everything was finally right, she said. I kept thinking about the future, our home, our family, the life we were going to build together. I wasn't scared. I wasn't unsure. I was happy. Really happy. Her voice trembled, just enough to show the weight of those recollections. When I got to the venue, everyone was smiling. My friends were fixing my dress, my mother was taking pictures, and I kept checking the time because I wanted to see your face the second I walked down that aisle. She paused, swallowing tightly. But minutes turned into 15, then 30, then an hour. People whispered. Someone asked if you were running late. Someone else asked if you were having doubts. I defended you. I told them you would never do that to me. I told them you loved me. Kusman closed his eyes briefly, the pain of her words cutting cleanly through him. By the second hour, Alison continued, I realized something was wrong. I went outside, still in my dress, searching for any sign of you. I called your phone. I texted you. I begged you to answer. And when there was nothing, it felt like the air was being pulled out of my chest. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She wasn't telling him this for sympathy. She was telling him because she needed him to know. Do you know what it feels like to have everyone you love staring at you, waiting to see if your whole future just collapsed? Do you know what it feels like to stand there in a dress you picked, with your heart, and hear someone whisper, he's not coming back? Kusman's throat tightened painfully. I can't imagine how much that destroyed you, he whispered. She nodded once. It did. And when I found out I was pregnant, the pain turned into fear. Fear of raising 2 babies alone. Fear of failing them. Fear of failing myself. Everything we planned, everything I believed, vanished in one day. He stepped forward slightly. I don't have words strong enough to make up for that. But I want you to know I thought about you every single day. I thought about what I ruined. I thought about what I cost you. And I hated myself for listening to my father instead of trusting you. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not in anger, but in scrutiny. Then why didn't you come back? She asked. Even once? Even to explain? Even to ask if we were okay? He took a shaking breath. Because I was ashamed, he admitted. I knew what I did was unforgivable. I convinced myself that showing up again would open your wounds even deeper. And I told myself you deserved someone better than a man who ran from his own life. Alison looked at him, the truth sitting heavily between them. Fear, she said softly. You let fear take everything from us. Yes, he replied. I did. But I'm done letting fear decide who I am. I'm done letting it control my family's future. She held his gaze for a long moment, letting the weight of his confession settle. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the regret, the determination, the genuine desire to change. He wasn't the same man who ran from the altar. He was someone shaped by years of guilt, growth, and distance. It hurt, she said, her voice lowering. It still does. And I don't know when it will stop. I don't expect it to heal quickly, he replied. But I want to earn whatever space you'll let me have, not just with you, with them, with our children. A soft breath left her lips. She wasn't ready to forgive, but she was ready to face the truth. We both failed, she whispered. You failed me by running, and I failed you by assuming you didn't care. Maybe neither of us had the courage to reach out. He nodded slowly, accepting her honesty. Then maybe this is where we start rebuilding, not from the wedding, not from the past, but from here, from today. The words hung gently in the air. Alison looked toward the waiting room where Mia hummed softly, her small figure framed by the doorway. I want them to know their father, she said. I want them to have what I didn't, but I need time, Kusman. I need to trust that you won't disappear again. He placed a hand over his heart. I won't, not ever. For the first time in years, she believed him. Not fully, not without caution, but she believed that he was trying, genuinely, earnestly. A step forward, a beginning carved from truth and wounds and the faintest spark of hope. When they re-entered the waiting room, Mia looked up with a wide grin. Are you done talking? She asked innocently. Alison smiled softly. Yes, sweetheart. Good, Mia said. Because Mark said he wants both of you with him when he comes back. They exchanged a glance, subtle, emotional, filled with a shared understanding. Their past was broken. Their present was fragile, but their future still had room to take shape. The afternoon sun had settled into a warm, gentle glow by the time Mark was brought back from his imaging tests. Alison Ball stood from her seat the moment she saw him, brushing a hand across his cheek and helping him ease back into his hospital bed. His eyelids drooped with fatigue, but despite the long day of assessments, his breathing seemed steadier, calmer. Mia hopped off the waiting room chair and hurried to his side, placing her newest drawing onto his blanket, a picture of the four of them standing outside the hospital, hand in hand under a bright sky. "It's us," she announced softly, as if presenting something precious. Mark smiled faintly. "I like it." Across the room, Kuzma and Panuski watched the twins with a mix of heartbreak and love. Every expression on their faces, every small smile, every tired blink, every quiet word, pulled him deeper into a world he had lost for years. A world that was finally letting him in. The nurse stepped in briefly to give an update. "Tomorrow morning we'll begin the pre-surgery preparations. Tonight he just needs rest. Keep things calm and comfortable." Alison nodded and thanked her before turning back to the children. For the next hour, the atmosphere grew surprisingly soft, almost peaceful. Alison sat on the edge of the bed, gently stroking Mark's hair. Mia leaned against her shoulder and hummed a tune under her breath, occasionally adding a few colored strokes to her drawing. Kuzman pulled a small chair close, not too close, and joined them. He didn't speak much, but his presence felt grounded, steady, and entirely focused on his children. It was the closest they had come to feeling like a family. When the nurse allowed the children a break from the bed, they gathered on the couch near the window. Alison handed Mark one of his favorite books, and Mia climbed beside him, pointing at each illustration with exaggerated flair. "You have to read the voices right," Mia insisted, demonstrating with a dramatic whisper. Mark chuckled, leaning his head against her shoulder. "Well, go ahead then." The lightness of the moment spread through the room, melting away the morning's fear. Even Alison smiled, a real smile, as she watched them. Kuzman leaned back in his chair, absorbing every detail. The giggles, the quiet whispers, the look of comfort between siblings. It all pierced him with an emotion he couldn't fully name, grief for the years he missed, gratitude for the moments he was finally allowed to witness. He wasn't sure what to do with that much feeling at once. At one point, Mia looked toward him and said, "Come sit with us." The invitation made his chest tighten. He moved slowly to the couch, sitting beside them, unsure whether he belonged there but overwhelmed that they wanted him there. Mark scooted slightly, making space without a word. The four of them sat together, the faint Boston skyline visible through the glass. It was a picture Alison never imagined she'd see again, one she once dreamed of, one she forced herself to forget. Yet here it was, and it felt natural in a way that frightened her and comforted her all at once. Later, the nurse returned and gently reminded everyone that Mark needed rest before tomorrow's major procedure. Alison tucked him back into bed, adjusting his blanket with a tenderness that softened the entire room. Mia curled up beside him, promising to stay awake but falling asleep within minutes. Alison kissed both of their foreheads, stepping quietly away so they could rest. Kuzman watched the scene with a tightness in his chest he couldn't hide. When Alison stepped outside the room for a moment to speak with Dr. Whitney, he followed her, not to intrude, but because something inside him was unraveling faster than he could contain it. Once they were in the hallway, away from the children, it happened. A slow, painful exhale, a tremor in his hands, a weight pressing down on him from years of guilt, fear, and longing. "I need a minute," he whispered, bracing a hand against the wall. Alison turned toward him immediately, her expression shifting from exhaustion to concern. "Hey," she said gently, stepping closer. "What's wrong?" He tried to speak, but emotion tightened his throat. He had spent his entire adult life mastering control of his career, his image, his choices, but none of that mattered here. None of it could protect him from the truth of what he felt right now. "I should have been here," he said, voice breaking. "I should have been here every single day of their lives. I missed everything, their first words, their first steps, their first birthdays, every moment I could have held them, protected them, watched them grow." He swallowed hard, tears burning behind his eyes. "I did this. I left you alone. I left them alone. And now he's lying in that bed because of something I passed on. I hate myself for it, Alison." She stepped closer, lifting a hand to his arm, not fully embracing him, but offering something human, something comforting. "You didn't choose the condition," she said softly. "And you didn't know. You made a terrible decision, yes, But you're here now, and that matters more than you think." He shook his head. "It doesn't change the years I missed." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't. But Mark and Mia don't care about the past as much as you think. They care about now. They care about you showing up today, and tomorrow, and every day after." Her voice softened further. "And so do I." Kusman looked at her, stunned by the honesty in her tone. "Alison." She held his gaze, steady, warm, complicated. "You're trying," she whispered. "And that means something." For a moment, the hallway felt smaller, quieter, holding them in a pocket of understanding neither expected to find tonight. As they stood there, close but not touching, something unspoken passed between them. A memory of who they were, a glimpse of who they might have been, a hint of what they could become if time and healing were patient. Alison looked away first, her voice barely above a breath. "We should get back inside. He'll wake up soon." Kusma nodded, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer. When they walked back into the room together, the sight of their children sleeping side by side under soft hospital light pulled them closer almost instinctively. Alison stepped beside him, their shoulders nearly touching, not by accident, not by comfort alone, but by the smallest spark of something returning. Not love yet, not fully, but the beginning of its return. Tonight, they stood as two people who had survived the worst of each other. Tomorrow, they would walk into surgery not as strangers, not as broken halves, but as a family taking its first fragile step back toward wholeness. Morning arrived at Boston General with an edge sharper than anything Alison Ball had felt in years. The sky outside the hospital windows was muted, a pale stretch of light offering nothing more than a quiet reminder that time was moving forward, whether she was ready or not. Inside room 12B, Mark sat upright in his bed as nurses moved around him preparing for the operation. He looked